Welcome to the Dietitians Unplugged podcast with Aaron Flores and Glenys Oyston. Join us as we explore the idea of health and wellness from a new perspective. Each episode, we will discuss topics that will help you improve your health, body image, and fitness without obsessing on the scale or counting calories. We believe in health at every size, intuitive eating, and body positivity, and we want to help you build the confidence to ditch the scale, embrace your health, and unplug from the world of diets and body shame.
Welcome back to the Dietitians Unplugged. This is Glenys and...
This is Aaron.
Hey, Aaron. Good to see you.
You too.
So today we're going to talk about, by request, ways to, if you're not going to diet, how are you going to eat? And how are you going to start to eat normally? Because maybe you've never eaten normally. So we have a lot of tips and tricks up our sleeve.
Yeah. And so it's really, it's whether it's intuitive eating, using Satter's model, using any sort of non-diet approach, how do you really start doing this and applying it to yourself after maybe you've listened to like a few podcasts and you're interested in actually doing some of these things. And the biggest question we get sometimes, and that a listener posed to us, is, well, how do I get started? Like where should I start? What's the first step?
Right. And I think we were just talking about this before we started here, and I think a key thing to know is what is kind of your problem.
Yep.
Because everybody comes at this with a different issue. Some people are like, I'm addicted to food and I'm overeating all the time. And some people are like, I can't feel hunger. And other people are like, I can't feel fullness, or I don't know when fullness happens and I blow past it. Or I'm afraid to eat different foods, or,
Or even I've been dieting for 35 years and I don't know which end is up with food. I can't
eat without a plan.
Right.
That's a very strict plan. So I think awareness is key.
Yes.
First thing. And sort of spending some time thinking about what is it that is troubling you with how you eat.
Right. So I think the first thing that I would offer to people, like the very first step, is exposure. And what I mean by that is read some books. Like read Intuitive Eating. Read, what book would you recommend of Ellen Satter's?
Secrets of Feeding a Healthy Family.
Okay, so read that book. Listen to our podcast. Hear the message, right? And really sort of expose yourself to what it means to give up dieting and learning to listen to your own body and have that be your regulation tool when it comes to eating. And I think that's the very first step, is just exposing yourself to some of these things so that you begin to really internalize what does it mean to do some of these things.
Right. And there are different books for different problems. So like Overcoming Overeating was one that I read early on because I thought that was my problem.
Yeah.
And that was really instrumental in understanding that a lot of my overeating problems came from restriction. So, and then there's the Diet Survivor's Hand Guide, which gives kind of like 60 tips of different things you can do to give up dieting.
Yeah.
And to get towards normal eating or internally regulated eating, which is totally not a sexy name, but
which is maybe the problem with all this.
Yeah.
Right?
There's no branding, real sexy branding going on here. Right. Just normal eating.
Which is really my one sort of segue I just want to talk about is I just learned that in July edition of Cosmo, there's a cover article about intuitive eating. And the author writes about how she embraced intuitive eating, how she recovered from an eating disorder using intuitive eating, and many other things in it. And she posted just a couple days ago from when we're recording this, I'm so happy that it came up. But the phrase that they used on the cover is, totally something about dieting, totally something about like, no stress eating, like I give up diet. They made it really sexy with the hashtag of like no guilt nachos.
Well, if Cosmo can't make it sexy,
right.
so So they did. So that's great.
They totally did. But at least there's an article in there
Yeah.
about.
That totally blows my mind that intuitive eating has gotten that kind of mainstream in a way.
Yeah.
And is going to expose so many people to it. And I mean, I hope that the article does it justice and it's not all about, and this is how you get thin. And that, you know, it's a real sincere effort towards really not dieting. So, so that's amazing that you can even just get exposure by reading Cosmo. And
Right.
You can skip all the other stuff in there if it's.
And the article was written by Caroline Rothstein.
Oh.
And
okay.
so look her up. She's got some really interesting articles about her own journey.
Yeah, so we'll look for that article.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll post it on our webpage when it
Yeah,
becomes
hopefully
available.
we can get,
Yeah.
So right, it's not sexy, right? It's not this, but this way of sort of eating is not sort of glamorous in nature, and it takes some work. So I think, again, when we talk about first steps, I think it's accepting that it's going to take some work.
Right.
Accepting that, hey, I'm going to do things a little bit differently. It's going to maybe bring up some other emotions. It's going to maybe touch on some things that I didn't think it would touch on. And I think that's an important first step also, to think about, hey, this is going to take some effort.
And that it's completely experimental.
Totally.
There isn't a really wrong or right way to do it unless, you know, it involves restriction.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I guess that would be the wrong way to do it. If you're still restricting yourself, then that's going to be a problem. But
Sure.
if you notice that you're doing that, that's another way to become aware
Yep.
of, oh, I'm still restricting myself.
Yeah.
Okay. What is that causing? What is
Yeah.
that bringing up?
Yeah.
So,
And, the interesting thing for me is that, I read intuitive eating once and was not ready for it. And I read it and I'm like, this is great. Sounds awesome. No way I think I could apply any of this stuff. And then I had to read it a second time before I knew I was ready. So personally, it was a message I had heard, and agreed with, but wasn't, for whatever reason, at the stage of my life where I was ready to actually do that work.
yeah. And that was kind of the same for me too. I read it and I went, I still kind of don't get it. Like what? I'm very step oriented. So I was like, what is the first thing I need to do here? And I've read that book like 3 more times since then. I agree. I go back to it all the time because it's always something new that I get from it. But yeah, the first time I read it was like, whoa, this is blowing my mind. I still don't know what to do. And that's when you say exposure, that's exactly what I did. I said, what else is
Right.
out there? The, Diet Survivor's Hand Guide by Judith Matz and Ellen Frankel is a good one. I read that, and the Overcoming Overeating. And then I got into Ellen Satter and read that. And so I started to put all of those things together for myself.
Right.
And figured out what is my problem.
Yeah.
And I kind of did figure it out from
Right.
that. And there's a lot of different things you can do. And we'll talk about some concrete steps you can take too.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of little things you can just put it together for yourself. I mean,
Exactly.
of course, if you need a help with this, there's a lot of programs out there that are available. Or see a health at every size dietitian or an intuitive eating dietitian.
Yeah.
Or a non-diet dietitian, basically.
Absolutely.
And they can help you if you need more one-on-one. But if you are just kind of dipping your toes in the pool to test the temperature, then get a bunch of books and,
Absolutely.
have a read.
Absolutely. So that's key, right? First is exposure. Next is sort of maybe being ready for this. Knowing when it's a good time in your life to sort of work on some of these things. So then it comes down to, okay, my toes are in the pool. What's next?
Right. So I had some ideas.
Yeah, please.
Okay. So what's your problem, basically? I hear a lot of people say, I'm addicted to food. I'm addicted to X, Y, and Z foods. And
I can't be around.
And I can't be around them. And I cannot have... I have heard this more in the last week, just with people I work with. Like,
Yeah.
oh, no. I can't have cookies in my house. I'll eat them all.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, well, I think the goal is for you to eventually eat them all. You don't... Really, I can tell you from experience, there's really nothing sadder than a few stale leftover Oreo cookies in your cupboard.
Like they've lost their friends.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I forgot to eat these. But how did I get to that point?
Right.
So the first tip I read early on that kind of blew my mind was this idea of, they call it stocking. Not stocking with an A, L, and a K, but just stocking with an O, C, K. So,
Okay.
From overcoming overeating. And if you've got a food or several foods that are your personal, what you would consider your addictive foods,
Yep.
the first thing you've got to do is liberate that food in your mind and say, okay, if I want that food, I'm going to eat it as much as possible, or as much as I want. Sorry. And one way to make sure that you have that food available is to make sure that your cupboards are stocked with it constantly.
It's always there.
Yeah, and that you have to have a few containers of it to make sure that you feel secure that you're not going to run out, even if you kind of go on a binge. So if you think you can eat a whole container of, let's say, Oreo cookies, one of my favorite foods. If you think you could eat a whole package in one sitting, then buy 4 packages.
Yeah.
And, see what happens when you're going through that. And we're not talking about just getting that food and going on a binge.
Right.
We're still talking about being present when you're eating that food. That's
Right.
the only thing I would say that you kind of need to be conscious of when you're eating that food. Just be in the moment with it.
Right. So for the intuitive eating language is permission, right? The
Exactly.
intuitive eating language for that is giving yourself unconditional permission to eat whatever you sort of want with attunement.
Mm-hmm.
So eating it, but also being attuned. So not checking out, right? It's not, so I think the thing I wanted to focus on is people are going to hear this, stalking unconditional permission, and they're going to say, that sounds absolutely batshit crazy. There's no way I can do that because all I'm going to do is eat Oreos for the next week, and that's not good for me. And so I'm to that person out there, right? My message to you is it's not just having the Oreos in the house. It's eating them with being aware, with being attuned, with checking in, with being present. Again, whatever language you want to use, but it's eating it and really focusing on the experience of eating it.
Right. Absolutely. And eating as much as you want, but being not sort of blanking out.
Exactly.
Not being like, I'm thinking of 1,000 other things while I'm eating this food, but I am really tasting the food too,
Yeah.
and being just, aware of your feelings too. What's
Yep.
going on? Am I eating this because it tastes good? Am I eating it because I have feelings about it? And just sort of staying with it, hanging
Right.
in there. Yeah.
And so it's almost like, again, that there's an emotion, right? And instead of, like you said, checking out from it, just be present with it.
Right. Feel the emotion. Eat the food, but feel the emotion too.
Right.
Because a lot of people, what they do with emotional eating is they're not feeling their feelings. We all emotionally eat. We have emotions when we eat. You go to a birthday, you have cake,
Sure.
and you're happy. So should you not eat that food because you're eating it because you're happy? No, of course not. The thing about emotional eating is when people are doing it wrong and they're using it to not feel those feelings. So again, it's just this blanking out
Yeah.
and stamping out of your feelings.
It's our
So,
escape.
Yeah. So once you've got all that food in your cupboard and you're making sure you have enough of it, and if you get down by a package, you're supposed to get another package of the food to make sure that you're secure and knowing that you're not going to run out of that food.
So, and to piggyback on that, the thing I also tell people when it comes to this is if you have a lot of fear as you're starting this, don't pick the most emotionally charged food. Like let's say Oreos are the most emotionally charged for you, right? Those are the biggest fear foods. But Hershey's Kisses don't have as much. I'm still scared to eat them, but it's less of a fear. Well, then let's start with those, right? Let's start with something that will challenge you, but will also not be so stressful that you will have such a negative experience with it that you don't want to go into any more work with it.
Yeah, that's a great idea, because usually when I talk to people that consider themselves to be addicted to certain foods, it's not just one food, it's a lot of foods. It's usually sweet foods, I've noticed. And the other thing you mentioned is that, people are like you said, that sounds batshit crazy. I can't eat Oreos for a week. That's bad for me. Your body will withstand a week of eating a lot of Oreos, for most of us. I mean, maybe if you are diabetic, that is going to be, you're going to have to stay on top of that with your insulin or your meds or whatever, or maybe this isn't the place for you to start. But for most of us that don't have a lot of health problems, your body can withstand a little bit, And chances are you've probably been overeating on these foods already anyway,
right,
when you get the chance.
Right.
So if you kind of go through this exercise, trust me, you will hit your wall with your favorite food. And I remember I hit the wall with ice cream once. And I was like, "Whoa, I just don't want to eat any more ice cream."
Right. So then in essence, right, through the end process of this stalking or giving yourself permission is the intuitive eating language part of it is then you've made peace with it. Right? That food no longer has the power that emotionally that it used to.
Exactly. It's liberated.
Right.
It has the same sort of equivalent as broccoli or whatever. So that's where you kind of want to get. And we know that nutritionally that's not true. Right. But that doesn't help you when you're dealing with overeating problems. The idea that they are different. Where you need to get is a point where those foods are all kind of equal and they share equal space in your diet,
right,
or equal importance in your diet.
Right. So. It's emotionally equivalent.
Right.
Which is something that intuitive eating talks a lot about, being emotionally equivalent with food.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So the end goal is not for you to binge on your addictive food for the rest of your life. That is not the end goal.
Right.
The end goal is usually people will tire of that food and they'll realize like, wow, our bodies are kind of geared to actually get tired of the same food, so that we do get
variety
in our diet. Yeah, and it's got a fancy name, and the name is eluding me right now. Alesthesia. It's also a really hard word to say.
Yeah.
Alimentary alesthesia, where your mouth will just get tired of eating that same thing. So it's got a technical name, and that's why you should believe us about this. Well, sometimes I feel like people are like, "You're making this up." No, it's in a book, and this is a real thing that happens.
Yeah.
And you're going to hit that eventually. But if your emotions are overriding that alimentary alesthesia, you're charged around this food, then you can override that. So, but if you're really, like we've talked about, being attuned to what's going on physically, emotionally, mentally, then you'll get there.
Absolutely.
So that's one place. I kind of started there because I just used to say to my partner, like, we can't have cookies in the house. I'm going to overeat them. And he's like, well, I'm having cookies in the house because I don't have a problem with them.
Yeah.
And that was a huge problem for me.
And I did the same thing.
Yeah.
I sort of looked at areas where I was not giving myself permission to eat foods. And for me, the interesting one that I used, that I started to make peace with, was mayonnaise. I love tuna salad. I love egg salad. I like putting mayonnaise on a turkey sandwich. And for a long time, for years, I would not put mayonnaise on anything. I wouldn't have egg salad. I wouldn't have tuna salad. And so that was an area that I sort of started to work on. And what's interesting is, even though I, continually sort of think about, I'm always working on being an intuitive eater. It's never sort of stops.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah.
So what I notice is that there are different times in my life where I realize there are different foods that I still need to give myself permission to eat. And so that it's a skill that's foundational that really helps as you continue to become an intuitive eater throughout your life.
Yeah, and it is an ongoing process. Like you said, I had an amazing instructor who was very health at every size savvy, and she said, foods aren't the addiction, dieting is the addiction.
Right.
And so for those of us who do have long histories of dieting, it's very easy for me to still occasionally slip back into the dieting mindset where it's like, ooh, should I? And then I catch myself. So it's an ongoing process, and it is a little bit of a recovery. But for me, and I've never found a food addictive since, and I've never had a problem with overeating on a food since I gave up dieting. And so I can attest to this process of the stalking and giving full permission to eat. That has been the best thing for me in terms of normalizing my eating.
Right.
So that's sort of one way to do it. One place to start.
Yep.
Another place is, what are the control messages that you're giving yourself in your head? So control messages versus unconditional permission messages.
Yep.
So we were just talking about chewing slowly, which is the one I hate. It just makes me think of Fletcherizing, the guy who told us to chew every bite 30 times. I don't know if you've ever tried this, but it's so gross.
Yeah, by the end, the food is really nothing, right?
It's a disgusting process.
Yeah.
Like, there are some foods you're going to have to chew 30 times. There are some that go down in about 3 chews.
And what's interesting is, like, when I think about that, too, it's really actually, again, when we talk about checking out, to me, counting as I'm chewing sort of allows me to check out. It doesn't help me tune in. It helps me get distracted to numbers and not what food tastes like.
Not tasting that bite.
Right.
Yeah, you're not being one with the food.
Right.
You know. Other control messages we've talked about were eat a vegetable before. We talked about this in an earlier podcast around Tracy Mann's book, Secrets of the Eating Lab.
Yep. Secrets from the Eating Lab.
Right.
Yeah.
And she suggested eating a vegetable before you eat the rest of your meal because it fills you up. And we were kind of on the fence about that one. I mean, what I realized recently is one day I had a meal in front of me and there was vegetable. I just did not feel like having vegetable as my first bite.
Yeah.
And I just wanted it to kind of be all mixed in with the other bites, you know? And so I think that is a control message because you're trying to trick yourself into being full.
Yeah.
And instead of giving yourself permission to eat whatever it is that's on your plate and eat it in whatever quantity you want to eat in.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I think the intuitive eating language for that is food rules. And examining, so a great place to start for some people is examining what are their food rules when they eat. And like you said, is it, I need to bite, I need to chew something this many times, I can't eat after 7. I shouldn't have this kind of food in the house. I'm not allowed to have this this regular fat product. I need to have low fat. It needs to be sugar free. I can't have carbs. There are so many food rules that we are exposed to and that we then internalize that it's really hard to sometimes tease out all the food rules. So just paying attention to the thoughts and feelings you have before eating and when you're eating and what's a rule and what's not is a great place to start also, because I think it helps you understand where you've come from, right? Why you have these rules. Where did it come from? Like, how did I get a rule that I'm not supposed to eat after 7 o'clock? Oh, I read it in a book and that's what they told me in Weight Watchers or whatever, you know, like you finally tease out, oh, that's a total diet food rule. And all of a sudden it's become a part of my life and I need to work on getting rid of that rule. Absolutely.
And I would even say, I was just thinking as you were talking about how, you know, I think the one food rule should be, it should taste good to you. But even that is, you know, you're going to have times when, this just tastes okay, but this is the food I have right now.
Sure.
And you just have to have pretty good food acceptance skills to get through life, I think, because not every meal is going to be the Last Supper and it's going to be awesome and amazing. I've just found that's unrealistic. So sometimes food's just going to taste okay. I don't want to eat stuff that I don't like, but I can eat food that isn't amazing too.
Right. Not everything has to be Thomas Keller, French Laundry food.
Is he from the French Laundry?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, new episode idea. Thomas Keller food reviews.
I lived in the Bay Area and I know about the French Laundry, but it was one of those places that's way too expensive to go. And so I just put everything about the French Laundry out of my head.
Listen, I've never been. It's my dream to go. So folks, my birthday's coming up in August. If you want to send me to the French Laundry, we'll do a little podcast from inside. It'll be awesome. You'll hear us chew.
30 times.
30 times.
Just kidding.
No, I'm totally obsessed with that place.
Oh, okay. Digression number 537.
Yeah. Noted.
French Laundry. Okay.
So here's one thing I want to add, right? As one of the ways to start with this stuff is this sort of central part, is being willing to work on all this stuff without focusing on your weight.
That's a huge one. Get rid of your scale.
Well, I don't even listen. I think that's revolutionary for some people.
Yeah.
Right. If you've been getting on the scale every day for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, to sort of say, oh, I'm never going to get on this thing. That's hard. But I will say, what if you could just get to the point, starting with this, that I'm willing to do all this stuff, work on all these things without the goal of changing the number on the scale. I think that's a great place to start with intuitive eating, with internally regulated eating, non-diet approach, to just say, you know what, I'm doing all of this for me, not for the number on the scale.
And that's one of the hardest places for people to start.
Huge.
Yeah.
Huge.
I had a hard time with that, actually. I kept my scale for a while.
I know a lot of people who've kept it for a while, both me also, but also clients. And it's a process. But I think if you can sort of get to that point where you say, I'm really interested to see how all this stuff works without the goal of this external device, that's a really important place to sort of approach a lot of this work.
Yeah, because I think for some people, their weight won't change. And for some people, their weight might go down. And I think that can be a distraction because you like what you see. And you might start putting rules on, what you're doing, and then you're back in diet land. Or your weight might go up.
Right.
And if you've been a weight suppressor for a long time, like
right.
I was, and you might freak out and want to head back to diet country.
Absolutely.
So I have a lot of names for diet land, diet country,
yeah,
diet zone. Yeah. And it's a distraction.
Absolutely.
From really getting in tune with what your body needs, which, by the way, is completely internally regulated. We have these cool things called leptin, which tell you how full you are.
Yep.
And those are suppressed in people who are suppressing their weight. We have ghrelin, which tells us how full we are. Wait, is that right?
How hungry we
are. I just said full.
Yeah.
How hungry we are. And those things are pretty foolproof.
Yeah, they work.
Except in people, when you've suppressed for a long time,
sure,
suppressed weight, they find that leptin goes way down. And that you don't really hit a full level for a long time. Yeah.
Well, the other thing,
but it can come back.
Absolutely.
Can come back. Yeah.
So the fancy word again, interoceptive awareness.
Whoa.
Right.
You just blew my mind with that.
So interoceptive awareness is how we perceive cues in our body, and for some people who have been struggling with eating disorders, they have very poor interoceptive awareness. They think they're hungry, they think they're full, but they're really not able to really sense those cues because of the suppression for so long. And so it takes some time for those things to come back.
Yeah, exactly. And they will come back. And I can attest to that myself, because I was amazed by how much, when I was much thinner, I could put away so much food and still feel like I needed more.
Yeah.
And now I thought I had some kind of early satiety problems, but I think I'm actually just getting full because my leptin is, it is regulated to some degree, I think, by fat.
Yeah.
And so my leptin is in full effect, and I can actually get full very early.
Right.
And I sense it.
Right. So we've touched into maybe another place to start is just learning to be attuned to hunger and fullness cues. And again, what I tell people is that there is no right or wrong when you start to listen to these things. It's just building the skill to listen. And it's maybe listening before a meal, it's maybe listening after, and it's maybe listening 1 or 2 hours after a meal or between meals. so that you really start to understand what are your own body signals, learning to tease out the emotional versus the physical. And that's another skill, place to start, area of focus, however you want to term, or however you want to say it, that really lends itself to long-term, non-diet skills that serve you for a long time.
And you use the right word, which is skill, because this is just a skill that you're going to be terrible at first, and then you practice.
Yeah.
And then you will become good at it. And it's just a skill. It's not a talent. It's not an inborn. I mean, we do have these inborn regulators, but if we're ignoring them for a long time,
Right.
It will become a skill that you build to get back to them. And one of the ways I think of listening to that for those hunger and satiety messages is to kind of stay attuned while you're eating. So
Right.
you could even set a timer if you wanted to. Just be aware of your meal as you're eating it for a sustained period of time.
Yep.
And if you haven't been doing that, then do it for a minute.
Yeah.
And that's it. Start with a minute and then build up to 5 minutes until you're used to doing it. Until you get comfortable with that minute, don't move up. So many of us are used to just eating and not being aware and not paying attention, and we live in a culture that, supports that. And so it can be sort of revolutionary to spend some time paying attention to your meal while you eat. So I would say start small with that and just notice how the food tastes and what it feels like to you. And then when you're developing those awareness, that awareness for your fullness point, you're going to play with that too.
Yeah.
Like, how does that feel for you? Do you need to be more full? Do you need to be just not hungry?
Yeah.
Everybody's a little bit different. And I was talking about this with you earlier, and my partner loves to be full after a meal. And he said, I love going to bed on a full stomach. And I was like, ugh, worst thing ever. And at nighttime, I don't like to be really full. I like to be sort of in a, just not hungry phase. And I don't want a distended stomach, and I don't want to activate my acid reflux when I go to bed. So we have different places where we like to be with fullness. And that's, I think, true for everybody.
Yeah. So I want to pause on some of these for a second, because I wanted to say one thing to people who are listening and maybe feel overwhelmed right now is, as we go through all of these places to start, I really want people to sort of understand that you don't start with all of them at once.
No, just pick one.
Just pick one. So we're spitting out a lot of ideas, a lot of different concepts, a lot of different areas that you might want to focus. I know some people out there are like maybe writing down everything and saying like, and then I got to do this. And that is sort of pause.
Yeah, you don't have to write them down. They're in books.
Right. But take a deep breath. Really, we just want you to listen to these. We just want you to sort of think about your own experience and to really focus on picking one. Pick one.
Yeah. My whole philosophy about life when I feel overwhelmed is just do one thing.
Right.
And that's it. And you don't have to do everything and be perfect. So we're just giving you all these ideas so you have something to choose as a place to start.
Right.
Maybe some of these things won't be relevant for you at all.
Right.
So
I just wanted to make sure we said that, because I could sense that, we are like giving out so many ideas, and all of a sudden someone's gonna be like, oh my God, I can't do all that.
You're envisioning our freaked out audience.
A little bit.
Press pause. This is horrible. Why won't they stop talking?
Right.
Yeah. So that's a great point to make. Just pick one place to start. And, if it's maybe just seeing how you feel about your weight and what would it feel like to just eat without worrying about your weight, maybe that's, maybe you just contemplate that for a while.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So in that vein, we just sort of took a pause, right? We took a deep breath.
Yeah.
And I know that you have a recommendation along those lines.
Yes. So this is something that Ellen Satter talks about, but I think all of the people that do non-diet nutrition sort of talk about this. Take a centering breath before you start a meal, and just give yourself, time to calm down a little bit. And in that breath, you're also going to say, I am going to give myself permission to eat what I want. I just have to take a centering breath first, and calm down. And that's it. And that's a place to start. And you don't have to do anything after that. Just take that breath.
Yeah. And I think that has been something that I know a lot of people have implemented and found a real benefit to. I mean, this is where the concept of mindful eating might come in, where, some even, maybe it's not just one centered breath. Maybe it's 30 seconds of deep breathing or 1 minute of deep breathing. But these things help us build that awareness
right
to the moment and helps us be present with eating. And sometimes, like we were talking about earlier, we don't want to be present. And I think this is where the mindfulness approach can really help us, because it helps us understand, this is what I'm bringing to this experience right now. I don't need to quiet it. I don't need to fix it right now. I just need to be able to be with it for right now while I'm eating.
Yeah. And I think whatever it is that calms you down, maybe it's a big deep breath. Maybe it's 4 deep breaths. Maybe it's, a lot of people say grace before a meal, which is maybe a nice way to pause for them.
Yeah.
And just kind of get ready to eat.
I think my most relaxed meals are when my family has Shabbat dinner, because there is a religious ritual, right? We light candles. We say blessings for the kids. We say blessings over wine. We say blessings over bread. And that 1 minute, 2 minute, 3 minute experience changes that dinner for me. And it makes it, it centers me. It allows me to just take a deep breath and sort of leave the week behind, right? So for those who don't know, Shabbat is on Friday night, and it's it's a way to sort of leave the week. It's over, right? I'm not going to stress about everything that is going on at work and in my life. I'm just going to be present with my family for this meal. I'm always amazed at how much it helps. How much it helps just change the ambiance of that meal to where it just makes it much more mindful.
And you're probably pretty relaxed by the time you get to the meal.
Absolutely.
Because that's something that's kind of nice for you and relaxing for
Yeah.
you. And I think there's nothing worse than going into a meal rushed and feeling stressed out.
Yeah.
And I've done that, and I still do it on occasion.
Yeah.
That's life. We're not perfect eaters. And I always know after, I was like, I did not enjoy that meal the way I wanted to. And then the heartburn starts. And then, so I know if I've gone into a meal rushed, it ends up in heartburn after.
So, and the interesting thing for me is I realized that through all this work with intuitive eating and through all this sort of curiosity and looking into my eating habits before, is that I was an angry binge eater. And that if I was angry, that binge eating was sort of like the way to, I know this sounds really bad, but I realized it was not a good thing, but it was a way to punish myself. It was a way to get rid of that anger, was to binge. And even so now, the way that I've realized that is when I'm angry is I can't eat angry. If I'm having a bad moment with the family, with work, with whatever, and there's anger and it's dinner time, like I just can't do it. I can't eat. I have to pause. I'll come back and eat later, but being angry and eating in the moment is just, I know that it to me, it feels like it's bringing up all this stuff. So I just say, I need to address this first before I can come back and eat.
That's an amazing realization that you had. Yeah. And so people trying this at home might have those realizations about emotions and eating.
Right.
And so that's another sort of idea that a lot of people suggest is journaling, not journaling in the way that you learn in weight loss programs, like you're writing down your food. It's writing down your feelings around food. And I think that that's kind of a different thing. I can't imagine it would cause the same stress as writing down what you're eating and then telling yourself, I can't eat anymore. What you're simply trying to do by using that journal is to just be aware of your feelings. And a lot of times people get overwhelmed by them. So writing them down can be a helpful way.
Right.
I think you've had a lot of experience with people using this method, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, and it goes back and forth. I think it depends on the person. So some people say, and I tell them, you're just like what you said, this is not your Weight Watchers journal. I don't want to know if you ate 4 ounces of chicken and half a cup of broccoli and a cup of rice. I don't need you to measure food for me right now. What I do want you to want to know is I would like to know what food you ate, right? I would like to know what was in that meal, because I think that can be helpful for many different reasons. And some people and then I want to know the emotions. I want to know the emotions, feelings, thoughts. I also want to know hunger and fullness levels. Some people will sort of embrace it and sort of say, that's great. I'm going to do some of this stuff and it helps. It brings up a lot of stuff and we're able to use that in a session and go through it. Some people who are chronic dieters, that is really hard. It's really hard to just disconnect the sort of diet mentality and journaling with this new approach with journaling. And what I do, I tell people like, okay, then let's not journal. Let's save that. Let's put that on the back burner for now. Let's do something else that's going to help you feel supported and build some confidence. So it's interesting because I've had a lot of people recently just say, I don't want to journal. Like, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about why. But eventually I think there is some benefit to it. And at least, and for the reason of, this is an intuitive eating term, is I want you to be a food anthropologist. I want you to learn to be like Jane Goodall, right? And observe and note and write down what's going on without being like an active participant, without judging it and without having to sort of dive into all those emotions. I just want you to observe and be curious. And I want you to build that skill because that will help you understand the moment and gain some perspective on it.
Yeah, and I can imagine a lot of people will get overwhelmed. So as a chronic journaler during my Weight Watchers days, I knew that the last thing I wanted to do was write down anything around my food. So that was not something that I took advantage of. But I think for people who have dieted in different ways, or that's not a kind of a triggering thing for them, then the journaling can be really helpful. And that's why we have a lot of different tools in our non-diet toolbox.
Yep.
Because some aren't going to work for people.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. The important thing that I would want anyone to think about is to be curious. Just approach all this stuff with curiosity. And I think that helps so much in approaching all these things, whether it's taking your deep breaths, whether it's journaling, whether it's listening to hunger and fullness, whether it's giving yourself permission. I think if you can come at it from a sense of curiosity and not from a place of judgment, you're going to come at it from a really healthy standpoint. It's going to help you with all this stuff down the road.
Yeah, and to give up the idea of perfection.
Right.
Because that's something that, as a dieter, I remember thinking, I ate so perfectly all week. And then, that's why I lost the weight, or that's, why didn't I lose the extra pound this week? And you need to get rid of perfection. I think you just need to get rid of the idea of perfection from most of your life.
Right.
Unless you're like an air traffic controller. Like, totally be perfectionist.
I want you to be a perfectionist. Yes.
Yeah.
Right,
we give you permission to be perfectionist. But for the rest of us, and especially around eating, forget about perfection. Right. That has no place in eating.
Right. So that's why, we talk about not being black or white thinking, right? It's all or nothing. Yeah. It's you're perfect or you're not.
I mean, I had a terrible meal this week, and I was really rushed. I had been on the road all morning for my job, and I had to rush back, and I was driving through the lunch hour, and then I had to come back for a meeting, and I had stupidly not planned that day for a snack, a really good snack, and I wasn't kind of prepared for being on the road all that morning. I came back, and it was 2:00 by the time I finally got to eat my lunch, which I was ravenous by then. I picked a meal from the food truck outside my building, and I'd forgotten that it was a meal. It was empanadas, and I love empanadas, but they were terrible. And I'd also forgotten that I'd had them before. Yeah. And that they were terrible. And I was like, oh, I got the bad. So I sat down to eat, and I was still feeling rushed, and I was so hungry. And I kind of mowed my way through that terrible meal. And afterwards, like acid reflux. And I just sat thinking, well, this was a completely terrible meal. It wasn't a terrible meal, but it was not great. But so what? Like later on, I'll have something I like to eat.
Yeah.
And I'll feel better. I'll take something for the acid reflux. And, shit happens.
Right. So it's letting go.
Yeah. And just being like, oh, well, that happened.
Yep.
It wasn't a great meal. I probably ate more of it than I wanted to. It didn't taste good, but I really needed something to put in my gut.
Yeah. Because if you didn't.
Well, I was going to overeat later on.
Right.
I mean, that's inevitable. So, and part of the problem was I'd already waited too long, I was starving. And so, I consider myself a pretty competent eater most of the time. But sometimes that stuff happens, and it's just a good reminder. Oh, I need to plan. I need to have better snacks.
Yeah.
Because I might be stuck again.
Right.
Yeah.
So again, it's no good or bad.
No,
right? It wasn't
no
black or white.
No.
It's just, this is what happened. I understand why. I understand all the things that played into it. Here's how I can do better next time. And then you move on.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was just information.
Right. Just data.
It's just knowledge.
Yep.
Yeah. And I didn't feel bad about it. I mean, I felt physically bad about it, which was a good reminder of like, hey, you've got to plan snacks. And usually I'm actually really good at planning my meals and planning my snacks. But because I was on the road all morning, I don't usually do that for my job. I just was thrown for a bit of a loop.
Yeah.
When that happens.
Yeah.
So no big deal. Yeah.
Yep.
So those are places to start.
Listen, I think there's a lot of, we gave a lot of good tips, right?
Yeah.
I think hopefully, for the person that's out there that's listening that is interested in jumping into this arena, I think there are some we hopefully you have some place to start after listening today. My wrap up comment that I would offer to people is that sometimes doing this alone doesn't work. Sometimes you might get to a point where you're like, okay, I've gotten so far. I'm in the pool. I'm in the shallow end. I know I need to make it to the other end, but I don't quite know how to get there. That's where you find a dietitian, you find a therapist if you need it, who knows about some of these things and can help you with the emotional part. But this is where you reach out to someone to get the support you need to help you get all the way across the pool. Right.
And I personally would prefer if you chose a health at every size oriented dietitian.
Absolutely.
And you can find those dietitians on HAYScommunity.org. Just Google Hayes Community.
Yeah.
And you'll find the link. And a lot of them list themselves there. Intuitive Eating lists dietitians who are trained in intuitive eating.
Or send us send us an email to dietitiansunplugged@gmail.com.
Yeah.
Or send us a message on Facebook, and we can help you find someone. We both will see clients, and we will we're happy to work with you. But if you don't like the way you want to work with us, there are so many other people out there. We are happy to send you a referral to people that we know do good work and will help you find the success that you want.
And there's an exciting, I think, new crop of products coming out from dietitians. If you don't want to work one-on-one with somebody,
yep,
there are a lot of sort of video programs that you can do.
Yeah.
Now, so we can recommend those too.
Absolutely.
So, as long as, just beware of false friends. You don't want something that's taking away permission or telling you you're going to lose weight on something, because nobody can guarantee that.
Right.
So there are a lot of legit programs out there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is an exciting time, actually, for this movement, because I think there are more and more people who are embracing it, more and more providers who are out there and giving what we would qualify as good messages. And I think it's nice that there are so many different voices, because we do need different voices in this community.
Yeah, that's what I love about this community, is that we're kind of non-competitive, I think, in that way, and that we're happy to refer to other people.
Yep.
And I found other practitioners so supportive. and of each other's work.
Absolutely.
You know, there isn't, I've not come across one iota of competition, which has been so great. And I would love for every dietitian to be a health at every size, non-diet dietitian. It would not bother me one bit. Put me out of work someday,
Absolutely.
you know? And so we're happy to help you connect with what you need.
Absolutely. So two things. One is we didn't reach our qualifying number of likes for the month of May.
Yeah.
So no funny pictures for you all. But I do want to thank all the people who gave us ratings and who wrote comments on our iTunes page. They are amazing. I read them this morning. So thank you to all of those people who reached out and actually took some time to give us some really positive feedback.
But I will extend the offer.
Okay.
If at any point we get to 100 ratings, when we get to 100 ratings, I will put up my ridiculous big hair 80s pictures.
Okay.
And
I'm down.
Will you still do your 80s dance, a video 80s dance?
Sure. So
I would do that too, yeah.
So I just watched CNN's like the 80s and they had one on music.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it was so good. Anyways, I'm all into the 80s music right now again. So yes, I will totally do that.
I don't understand that, but okay.
All right.
I forgive that about you.
Well, I forgive your Canadian.
I hate the 80s. Don't say you hate Canadians.
I don't hate Canadians. Wayne Gretzky is probably one of my most beloved icons.
And then we also have a question from a reader.
Yeah.
This is a new segment. Well, let's just call it a new segment. This is questions from readers answered.
Do we need a new like jingle?
Yeah, maybe we'll work on getting a new jingle.
Yeah. Questions from the audience. That was pretty good,
That's the jingle.
That was it.
That's it.
Okay. So this comes from a listener that we just got it today. She is actually studying to be a dietitian. And so she wanted us to answer a question, and I'll just read it. She goes, I was wondering if you would ever talk about whole dairy foods versus reduced or non-fat dairy products. I think there's a skewed cultural understanding of this, backed by the American dietary guidelines. And I'm just curious as to what your opinions are.
Great question.
Great question.
Yeah. So first of all, of course, the first thing I would say is if you really like non-fat dairy, if you love it, like drink it or eat it, whatever.
Okay.
But I would say that the reason we demonized whole fat milk for so long was sort of from all that flawed data that came from Ansel Keys studies, the 7 country studies, all of that stuff that people are starting to look at now around low fat,
right?
That it's saturated fat that is the dietary demon.
Yep.
And the problem with all of that nutrition data was the way they studied it, and there was some cherry picking around information, and it was flawed. The science was flawed, and it was sort of driven by, I think, personal passions around what people thought, biases around what people thought was good for us. So people just got on to, a few people that were very influential got onto the idea that saturated fat and really all fat probably, but mostly saturated fat, I guess, and too much fat of other kinds is bad for us.
Right.
And so I really think looking back at when the low fat craze hit its stride in the 80s, I don't think that helped anybody.
Right.
I from what I've read now, I've read some of Gary Taub's work on around fat, and I kind of half agree with him on a lot of his theories.
Yeah.
There's other stuff I don't maybe agree with him, but I just don't think that saturated fat was quite the dietary demon that
we made it out to be.
That we made it out to
Right.
be. And now they're actually coming out with some studies, and we of course want to see a trend. We don't want to ever just look at one study and go, and this is the final word on this. We want to look at a trend of studies, so hopefully they'll study it more, but starting to say that people who have whole fat milk in their diet, I think there was like lower association of diabetes. I think that was the most recent thing I read, and that those people tend to have, I think it was lower weights and all sorts of things that it's like, oh, it turns out whole fat milk was not such a bad deal. And personally, now I can't drink milk because I have a little milk allergy. But I can do other kinds of dairy in, small quantities.
Yeah.
And I tried whole fat yogurt, and it was so much more satisfying than just a non-fat yogurt that left me still hungry
Right.
after. So I think that there is something to be said for including whole fat dairy foods in your meal if you like it, because fat is satiating.
Right.
You know?
And I would offer this as, there's a lot of politics in our food. And I always sort of think of Marion Nestle and her writings, foodpolitics.com. And, looking at the influence of the dairy industry on our dietary guidelines is very interesting. And I think of how that has affected our dietary guidelines is also very interesting. And she examines that much better than I could ever do. So check out what she writes with regards to this. I would also say that for a lot of people, they drink non-fat milk because of their dieting history. They really enjoyed whole milk. And when they switched to non-fat, they would say, oh, it's blue water, or it doesn't taste that good, or whatever. And I think the past dietary advice I would even give before I sort of went into this intuitive eating world was, well, you'll get used to it.
Yeah.
And I've heard other dietitians say that. And I regret saying that, because why should I have to get used to it? So I drink 2% milk in the house because that's what tastes good to me.
Right.
And so to me, again, looking at food rules, looking at how food makes my body feel, that is what we have in our house. And that's what that's what satisfies me, both hunger, fullness wise, but also pleasure wise. And so I think, look at those things. Look at what really satisfies you. And if drinking a glass of regular whole milk satisfies you, go for it. I don't think there's anything wrong with it.
Right. I think all foods fit, and in a well-balanced diet, when you get to the point of you're creating well-balanced meals for yourself, you've got the meal habit, you're eating regularly, include whole milk or whole fat dairy if that's something you like. Don't let nutrition policy take away permission.
Right.
And food politics. Don't let that take away permission from you eating what you like, because it's the data around how this was all supposed to be bad for you is flawed. Right. And I think whole fat dairy for kids is especially important because they need
absolutely.
A ton of fat in their diets. They need fat. They need everything.
Right.
But I think to take the fat out of foods that normally have fat in them, I think it messes with our regulation.
Interesting.
Yeah. I think that making a Snackwell's cookie that is whatever that was, I remember eating those.
Yeah.
One was not enough. I did want the package. So
Right.
I never hit a satiety point with those foods. So I think that there's something to be said for leaving the fat in foods that naturally have fat. So, but again, it's a total up to you thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, and the way I would sort of wrap that up is to say, if by using all these skills, we become the nutrition experts in ourselves. And that, in the end, that's what can really guide your food choices.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for that question. I think it was great, and hopefully we'll get some more and increase our segment where we really will need a jingle.
We'll work on that.
Yeah.
We have a few in our back pocket.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in to this episode of Dietitians Unplugged. It's been great talking about some steps to get started with all these things. I hope you've enjoyed it. And for Glenys, this is Aaron. We will talk to you again soon. Thanks.